Number 10. Doggerland, the drowned world beneath the North Sea. In 1931, a fishing trawler was dragging its nets through the Leman and Ower banks of the North Sea, about 25 miles off the English coast, when something heavy caught in the rigging. When the crew hauled it aboard, it was not a fish. It was not wreckage. It was a block of peat, and buried inside that peat was a weapon. A barbed antler harpoon, hand-carved, roughly 8 inches long, and more than 10,000 years old. That should not have been there. Because the harpoon had not been dropped from a boat, it had not fallen from a passing ship. It had been used on land, by a hunter standing on a forest floor, in a place where there is now more than 100 feet of cold salt water above his head. That single object cracked open one of the strangest truths in European prehistory. The North Sea was not always a sea. It was once a world, a vast lowland territory stretched between Britain and mainland Europe, connecting eastern England to Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany. Rivers ran through it, forests grew across it, mammoth, aurochs, red deer, and wild horses moved across its plains, and humans lived there. They hunted along riverbanks that no longer exist. They made fires where waves now roll. They crossed landscapes that no modern coastline can show. Today, we call that drowned world Doggerland. But the people who lived there had their own name for it, and that name is gone. For decades, the evidence came up in fragments. A flint blade in a fishing net, a bone tool from the seabed, animal remains from a place where no animal should have walked, pieces of human skull pulled from beneath one of the busiest seas in Europe. At first, each discovery looked like an accident. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. Modern surveys began mapping buried river channels, ancient valleys, and submerged landscapes beneath the seabed. Seismic imaging revealed the shape of a lost country. Bathymetric scans showed that this was not a small island or a strip of coast. It was a living landscape, and it had vanished. But the seabed was only half of the problem. The other half was older, stranger, and harder to explain. Some older charts did not treat this water as empty. They marked banks, islands, and broken coastal shapes in places where the modern North Sea should have been blank. Mainstream historians usually explain these as mistakes, myths, or guesses made by cartographers working with incomplete information. And they may be right. But Doggerland makes the mistake harder to dismiss, because now we know there really was land beneath that water. So the question changes. Were those old shapes just errors? Or were some of them damaged memories of a coastline that disappeared before written history began? Doggerland did not vanish in one clean moment. At first, the drowning was slow. As the last ice age ended, glaciers melted and sea levels rose. The lowlands began to shrink. Rivers widened into estuaries. Marshes spread across old hunting grounds. Camps that had once been safely inland became coastal. Then the coast moved again. For generations, people may have watched their world retreat. A path gone. The Eyes River changed, a place remembered by grandparents becoming water. Then, around 6,200 BC, the slow disaster became sudden. Far to the north, off the coast of Norway, a massive underwater landslide tore across the seabed. Today, it is known as the Storegga Slide. The collapse displaced enough material to send a tsunami across the North Atlantic. When that wave reached what remained of Doggerland, it did not arrive as myth. It arrived as height, force, and noise. Lowlands were swallowed. Camps vanished. Animals fled or drowned. Any people still living on the remaining islands would have seen the horizon rise against them. In a few hours, the last pieces of Doggerland may have gone. This is what maps cannot show. A map can draw a coastline. It cannot show a family running from the sea. It cannot show the last fire going out on land that would never be walked again. Doggerland proves that the map of Europe is not permanent. It is only the latest version. And if an entire human landscape could vanish beneath the North Sea, then the next lost land asks an even larger question. What if one of the most important migrations in human history began on a continent that no longer exists? That brings us to Beringia. Number 9. Beringia, the vanished subcontinent that populated the Americas. On Arctic shores, mammoth tusks still wash out of the frozen ground. Ancient bones rise from melting permafrost. Stone tools appear in places that look empty on modern maps. And beneath the shallow seas between Siberia and Alaska lies the floor of a world most schoolbooks reduced to a bridge. For a long time, that was how Beringia was described. A bridge, a narrow strip of frozen land between Asia and North America. A passage, a route, a place people crossed on their way to somewhere more important. But that was never the full truth. Beringia was not just a bridge, it was a world. At its greatest extent, it stretched from eastern Siberia to northwestern Canada, covering roughly 1.6 million square kilometers of dry land. That made it larger than modern Alaska and Yukon combined. For more than 20,000 years, it stood above the sea as a vast northern subcontinent, and it was not empty. It was part of the Mammoth Steppe, one of the richest Ice Age ecosystems on Earth. Woolly mammoths moved across its grasslands. Steppe bison grazed in the cold wind. Musk ox, caribou, horses, and other animals followed seasonal routes across a land no modern traveler can walk. And somewhere in that frozen world, humans survived. Not for a season, not for a short crossing, for thousands of years. This is where the old migration map begins to fail. Genetic evidence suggests that a founding population lived in or around Beringia for a long period of isolation before spreading into the Americas. In other words, the ancestors of many indigenous peoples of the Americas were not simply passing through a corridor. They were living on land that later disappeared. They raised children there. They followed animals there. They learned the shape of rivers, hills, coastlines, and winter routes that are now beneath the Bering and Chukchi seas. Their world was real. Then the ocean took it back. As the last ice age ended, the climate warmed and sea levels rose. The low plains of Beringia began to flood from both sides. Water crept inward from the Pacific and the Arctic. River valleys became estuaries. Hunting grounds became marshes. Marshes became an open sea. This was not a single wave like Doggerland. It was slower, colder, more merciless. Year after year, the land narrowed. The animals moved. The old routes failed. Families who had known the same country for generations had to choose. Move east into the Americas, move west back toward Siberia, or stay with a world that was shrinking under their feet. That is the part most migration maps leave out. They show arrows crossing empty space. They do not show children leaving a homeland that was becoming a sea. They do not show the last winter camp before the coast moved again. And this is where Beringia becomes uncomfortable for another reason. Some early modern maps, drawn before Vitus Bering's 1728 voyage, officially confirmed the strait between Asia and North America, did not simply leave the far north blank. They sketched land, channels, and uncertain coastlines in the very zone where modern science now places a drowned subcontinent. Mainstream historians usually explain these as guesses, inherited errors, or speculation by cartographers working with incomplete reports. And that explanation may be correct, but Beringia makes the question harder to ignore, because once again, a place that looked like a cartographic rumor turned out to have been real. Not exactly as the old maps imagined it, not preserved cleanly, but real enough that modern science had to redraw the human story around it. The bones, the tools, and the genetic record all point back to the same vanished north. This does not replace the origin stories or sacred histories of indigenous peoples. It only adds one haunting geological layer beneath them. Before people spread into the Americas, a vanished land may have held them for thousands of years. Before the map showed two continents separated by sea, there was a northern world between them. Then the water rose, and the bridge disappeared. If one of the most important human migrations began on land that no longer exists, then human history is not only written in caves, bones, and tools. Some of it is written under shallow seas, and the next lost land takes that idea even further. Because sometimes the proof of a drowned continent does not come from a legend. It comes from grains of sand on a volcanic beach. That brings us to Mauritia. Number 8. Mauritia, the billion-year-old fragment beneath the Indian Ocean. Sometimes a lost continent does not begin with a ruin, no buried city, no broken temple. Sometimes it begins with something so small you could brush it from your hand without noticing, a grain of sand. In 2013, geologists studying beach sand from the island of Mauritius found crystals that should not have been there. The island itself is young, at least in geological terms. Mauritius rose from volcanic activity only a few million years ago. Its rocks belong to a recent chapter in Earth's story. But inside the sand were zircon crystals. And zircons are not ordinary grains. They are survivors. They can endure heat, pressure, erosion, and volcanic violence. They can pass through worlds being broken apart and still hold the date of their birth. When scientists tested the zircons from Mauritius, the numbers did not match the island. Some were hundreds of millions of years old. Others were close to 2 billion years old. That was the impossible detail. A young volcanic island should not have been carrying crystals from ancient continental crust unless something much older was buried beneath it. The beach was not just a beach. It was evidence leaking through the floor. Imagine an old continent torn apart, then sealed under fresh volcanic rock. Millions of years later, tourists walk across a tropical beach, never knowing the sand beneath them carries fragments from a continent the surface forgot. Further studies pointed to a hidden piece of ancient continental crust beneath the Indian Ocean, between Madagascar and India. Scientists named it Mauritia. Not a myth, not a sacred homeland, not a kingdom swallowed in one night. A real geological fragment, broken from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, including India, Madagascar, Africa, Antarctica, and other landmasses, pulled away from one another. But the strangest part was not that Mauritia was old. It was that it had been hiding under something young. Mauritia did not die like the lost human worlds before it. Its loss was older, slower, and almost completely silent. As Gondwana broke apart, pieces of continental crust were stretched, fractured, dragged downward, and buried beneath younger volcanic material. Most of Mauritia slipped below the ocean. Later, volcanic islands formed above parts of it, pulling ancient crystals upward from the buried scar below. That is what makes this case different. The maps may be wrong, the legends may be wrong, but the crystals are not guessing. They do not care what humans believe. They do not need a story to survive. They simply hold their age, silently, until someone asks the right question. And the question they raise is disturbing. If Mauritius could sit above a hidden continental fragment for millions of years, how many other oceans are hiding the same thing? How many pieces of ancient land have no name yet? How many continents have been broken, buried, and covered so completely that only one mineral grain can betray them? Mauritia is not frightening because humans forgot it. It is worse than that. It is a continent no human ever had the chance to remember. The planet had erased it before our stories began. Some lost lands survive in myths, flood stories, or strange shapes on old maps. Mauritia left no story behind, no warning, no memory, no human witness, only sand. A beach can look peaceful. A volcanic island can look young. But beneath it may lie the buried remains of an ancient continent, waiting for the smallest possible evidence to reach the surface. Mauritia proves the map is incomplete for a reason more unsettling than memory. Some chapters were buried before humans ever arrived. But the next lost continent is even stranger, because it did not simply sink beneath the ocean. It was crushed beneath Europe. Number 7. Greater Adria, the dead continent beneath southern Europe. Place your hand on a marble wall in Rome. The stone feels solid, permanent, civilized. But But part of that stone may come from the scraped-off surface of a continent that no longer exists. Not a ruined kingdom, not a drowned island. A continent buried beneath southern Europe, hidden under mountains, ruins, roads, and cities, where millions of people walk every year without knowing what lies below them. Its name is Greater Adria. And for most of modern history, no one saw it as a continent at all. In 2019, after years of geological reconstruction, researchers revealed that the Mediterranean region had once contained a massive landmass roughly the size of Greenland. It had broken away from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, drifted north for millions of years, and eventually collided with what would become Europe. But the evidence was not sitting in one place. It was scattered in mountain belts, in limestone, in folded rocks, in fragments of crust spread across Italy, the Balkans, Greece, Turkey, and the Alps. The team reconstructed the missing continent through plate models, rock chemistry, structural geology, and the broken remains left behind across the Mediterranean. Piece by piece, the shape of Greater Adria came back. And then the story became violent. Because collision is too gentle a word. Greater Adria did not simply touch Europe, it was consumed. As it slammed into the southern edge of the continent, most of it was forced downward into Earth's mantle. Layer by layer, the landmass was dragged below the surface. Its upper rocks were scraped off, crushed, folded, and lifted into mountain ranges. The Alps, the Apennines, the Dinarides, parts of Greece and Turkey, places that look like the proud bones of Europe may actually be the torn surface of a vanished continent. But the strangest part is this. Greater Adria did not disappear completely. It became the scenery. You can walk on it without knowing. You can build with it. You can carve temples, roads, statues, and monuments from it. The limestone of Italy, the marble of the ancient Mediterranean world, and the mountain stone rising above villages all carry the memory of a landmass that died before humans existed. Rome was built, in part, from the remains of a lost continent. Athens stood in a region shaped by its destruction. Europe's beauty sits on geological violence, and that changes the way the ground feels. We like to imagine continents as the stable parts of Earth. Oceans shift, rivers change, empires rise and fall, but the continents remain. Greater Adria says otherwise. Continents can lose. They can be broken, buried, scraped apart, and recycled into something else. Their bodies can become mountains. Their seafloors can become cliffs. Their ancient sediments can become the stone beneath a cathedral floor. And almost no one living above them will ever know. This is why Greater Adria belongs in this story, even though no ancient map could have recorded it in its living form. No sailor saw its final coast. No priesthood remembered its rivers. No myth preserved its cities. It vanished too early for human memory, but it reveals the deeper rule behind every lost land in this video. Earth does not preserve old geography. It reuses it. It folds old worlds into mountains, buries them under seas, drags them into fire, and millions of years later, humans build on the surface and call it permanent. That is the illusion. The map only looks final because our lives are short. Greater Adria lived as an independent landmass for more than 100 million years. Then it collided, vanished, and became part of another continent's body. And the process has not stopped. Africa is still tearing along the East African Rift. India is still driving into Asia. The Himalayas are still rising. The map we know is not finished. It is still being made beneath our feet. Greater Adria is not just a dead continent. It is a warning from below. If a landmass the size of Greenland can be buried so completely that people build civilizations on its remains without knowing, then the next case asks a different kind of question. Not a continent beneath stone. A continent at the top of a map. 4 lands, dark waters, and a black mountain drawn where the Arctic should have been blank. That brings us to Hyperborea. Number 6, Hyperborea, the impossible north on Mercator's map. At the top of Mercator's 1569 world map, the Arctic was not empty. Not blank ice, not empty water. Mercator drew 4 great landmasses divided by dark waterways, arranged around a central polar sea. And at the very center, he placed a black mountain. That should stop you. Because in the 16th century, no cartographer could have surveyed the Arctic Ocean. There were no satellites, no submarines, no sonar, no way to map what lay beneath the polar ice. And yet Mercator did not leave the north unknown. He gave the unknown north borders, waterways, and a center. This was not a sea monster drawn in the margin to decorate the unknown. This was Gerardus Mercator, one of the most important cartographers in history, giving the far north a shape. He called the region by a name that was already ancient, Hyperborea. To Greek writers, Hyperborea meant the land beyond the north wind, a far northern place where the sun behaved strangely, where summer light lingered, and where a blessed people lived beyond the reach of ordinary storms. It sounds like a myth, and maybe much of it was. But Mercator was not inventing the name from nothing. Greek writers had been speaking of Hyperborea since the age of Hesiod and Pindar, more than 2,000 years before Mercator's map. And Mercator claimed to be working from older sources, including a lost medieval text known as the Inventio Fortunata, which itself was said to preserve reports from earlier northern traditions. That is where the map becomes difficult to dismiss. Not because it proves Hyperborea existed exactly as drawn. It does not. Not because it proves ancient sailors mapped the Arctic with impossible technology. It does not prove that either. But it does prove something stranger than an empty mistake. Mercator treated the unknown Arctic as if it already had a hidden architecture. And the real Arctic is not simple. Modern bathymetry has revealed that the Arctic Ocean floor is cut by major ridges, basins, and underwater structures, including the Lomonosov Ridge and the Gakkel Ridge. These features divide the polar seabed in ways no one in Mercator's time could have measured directly. The match is not exact. It is not clean. Mercator's 4-part Arctic is not a modern seafloor map. But the uncomfortable fact remains. The old map imagined a divided polar world in a place that later proved to be divided beneath the ice. That is the tension. It could have been a legend, sailor rumor, symbolic geography, or a mythic mountain copied from older sources. But none of that answers why the shape survived for so long. Hyperborea was not born in Mercator's workshop. Over time, poets gave it beauty, scholars gave it authority, sailors gave it a rumor, cartographers gave it borders. By 1569, the legend had become geography, and that is why Hyperborea refuses to behave like a normal myth. It sits on the border between evidence and inheritance, too detailed to dismiss easily, too uncertain to accept blindly. A modern map shows the Arctic as an ocean and ice. Mercator's map showed a question. A wrong map usually fades. This one did not. The eye keeps returning to the top of the parchment. 4 lands, dark channels, 1 black center. Maybe Hyperborea was only a myth drawn with confidence. Maybe it was a distorted memory of northern islands and lost reports. Or maybe, somewhere inside the error, there was a fragment of something older. That is the problem with ancient maps. The clean mistakes are easy to correct. The half-memories are not. Hyperborea remains there, above the known world. A northern land beyond the wind. Not proven, not forgotten. Still difficult to bury. But the next lost land is different. It does not come from a European cartographer looking north. It comes from a people looking south, toward a drowned homeland they said the sea had taken. That brings us to Kumari Kandam. Number 5, Kumari Kandam, the drowned Tamil motherland. In the Tamil tradition, the sea did not just take land. It took academies, poets, cities, a southern homeland remembered as Kumari Kandam. Unlike the lost lands before it, this one does not begin with tools, crystals, or mountains. It begins with memory. Tamil tradition speaks of a vast land that once stretched south of India, deep into the Indian Ocean. It was not remembered as empty wilderness. It was remembered as a first homeland, a place of rivers, mountains, kings, poets, and ancient learning before the sea swallowed it. That claim must be handled carefully. Kumari Kandam is not confirmed as a sunken continent in the way Zealandia is confirmed. It is not proven by mineral evidence like Mauritia. It is not mapped beneath the sea with the same certainty as Doggerland. But it is not easy to dismiss either, because the tradition is unusually specific. Later Tamil accounts connected this drowned southern land with the ancient Sangam academies, gatherings of poets and scholars said to have preserved language, literature, and culture across enormous spans of time. According to tradition, the first Sangam lasted 4,440 years and gathered 549 poets. The second lasted 3,700 years before the sea took that world too. Those numbers are not accepted as literal history by mainstream scholars, but they matter as cultural memory. Because this is not just a story about land disappearing. It is a story about language losing its first home, about poems that no one can read because the world that held them went underwater, about a culture looking south and saying, something was there before the sea took it. That is the human weight of Kumari Kandam. Not proof, not certainty, but a memory too persistent to vanish. And that memory points south. But then the seafloor makes the story harder to dismiss. During the last ice age, global sea levels were much lower than today. Around the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, sea levels were about 120 meters lower. The shoreline of southern India would not have looked exactly like the coastline we know now. Portions of the continental shelf, coastal plains, and submerged features south of India would have been exposed or shaped very differently. The Chagos-Laccadive Ridge runs southward through the Indian Ocean like a hidden spine beneath the water. It does not prove Kumari Kandam was a vast lost continent, but it reminds us that the modern coastline is only the latest version of a changing edge. The sea has moved. That much is not a myth. And once you accept that, the question becomes harder. Did Tamil tradition preserve a distorted memory of real, drowned landscapes? Or did a powerful literary culture create a myth that happened to echo geological truth? Neither answer is small. If Kumari Kandam is only a myth, it is still a myth built around one of humanity's oldest terrors, that the sea can take not only homes, but memory itself. If even a fragment of it preserves old shoreline memory, then human cultural memory may reach deeper than modern history is comfortable admitting. That is why Kumari Kandam refuses to behave like a simple legend, too uncertain to prove, too specific to ignore. Kumari Kandam may not have been the vast continent that later imagination described. It may have been smaller, a drowned shelf, a chain of coastal plains, a memory enlarged by grief. But even that would matter, because a lost homeland does not need to be the size of a continent to become the center of a people's imagination. It only needs to be remembered as the place where something began. A language, a literature, a first world before the flood. A people looked south and saw absence. Not empty water, absence. That absence may be historical, literary, or both, fused over generations until geography and grief became impossible to separate. That is the power of Kumari Kandam. It sits at the edge of proof and mourning, not confirmed, not erased, still carried in the language of those who remembered a south before the sea. But the next case moves from cultural memory to one of the most controversial maps ever found. Not memory this time, not legend, a map. A piece of gazelle skin parchment, signed in 1513, that seemed to show a southern land before anyone was supposed to have mapped it. That brings us to Piri Reis and Terra Australis. Number 4. Piri Reis and Terra Australis, the map that should not know the South. In 1929, inside the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, historians found a piece of gazelle skin parchment. It was not large. It was not complete. It was only a surviving fragment of a much larger map. But on that fragment was a problem. The map showed the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and along the lower edge, a mysterious southern land. The signature was clear. Piri Reis, Ottoman admiral, cartographer, and the man who compiled the map in 1513. And in the notes written on the map, Piri Reis claimed he had not invented the coastlines himself. He said he had compiled them from older source maps, many of which are now lost. That is where the story becomes dangerous. Because if the map were only a 16th century work, it would already be impressive. But if some of its geography came from older maps, then the question changes. How old were the sources, and what did they know? In the 20th century, the Piri Reis Map became one of the most controversial artifacts in cartographic history. Some researchers argued that the land drawn along the bottom was not simply a distorted extension of South America. They claimed it resembled the coast of Antarctica, or at least part of the southern polar world, before that region was supposed to have been mapped. That claim is not proven, and that matters. The standard explanation is that the southern coastline on the Piri Reis Map is most likely a distorted rendering of South America, shaped by copying errors, projection problems, and the limits of early modern geography. That explanation may be right, but the controversy did not disappear, because the Piri Reis Map is not alone. For centuries, European and Islamic cartographic traditions carried the idea of a great southern land, Terra Australis, a balancing continent, a vast unknown territory imagined at the bottom of the world. Some maps showed it vaguely. Others gave it coastlines, bays, mountains, rivers, or internal divisions, long before the southern polar continent was properly explored. Much of this may have been theory. Ancient and medieval geographers often believed the Earth needed a southern landmass to balance the known lands of the north. Cartographers copied earlier maps. Errors became tradition. Blank spaces invited invention. But the uncomfortable part is this: some of the shapes refuse to behave like simple decoration. The Orontius Fine Map of 1531 showed a southern land with surprising detail. Mercator's 1569 world map also included a large southern continent. Later, the Philippe Boich map of 1737 depicted Antarctica as two major land areas divided by water, an idea that became stranger after modern science revealed that East and West Antarctica are separated beneath the ice by deep subglacial structures. That does not prove those cartographers knew Antarctica as modern science knows it. It does not prove an ice-free Antarctic civilization. It does not prove a lost global survey. But it does prove something more subtle. The southern continent kept returning, map after map, century after century. Before, explorers had the tools to confirm what was really there, and the Piri Reis Map remains the most haunting fragment of that tradition because it comes with a confession. It tells us it was copied, compiled, inherited. Piri Reis said he used around 20 source maps. Some were Portuguese, some were Arabic. Some, according to his own notes, reached back into much older traditions. Most of those sources are gone. That is the wound in this case, not just the coastline, the missing library behind it. We are looking at a fragment of parchment and trying to judge the knowledge of maps that no longer exist. A copy of a copy. A survivor from an archive we cannot open. A piece of geography with its ancestry burned away. And that is why the Piri Reis Map refuses to behave like an ordinary mistake. A normal mistake ends with correction. This one leads backwards, to lost charts, lost sailors, lost libraries, lost chains of transmission. The southern land may have been a distortion. Terra Australis may have been a theoretical continent drawn because mapmakers expected the world to be balanced. The resemblance to Antarctica may be a coincidence, shaped by projection, imagination, and centuries of copying. All of that is possible. But the question remains sharp. Why did so many maps insist that something was waiting in the far south? Why did the idea survive before proof arrived? and how much older knowledge vanished before modern geography had the chance to test it. A modern map shows Antarctica as the frozen continent at the bottom of the world. The Piri Reis Map shows something more fragile, a clue with broken edges, a southern shape without its full explanation, a parchment witness that seems to say, this was not the first map. And if that is true, then the real mystery is not only what Piri Reis drew, it is what his lost sources once contained. Because sometimes the most dangerous map is not the one we still have. It is the map behind it, the one that disappeared. Piri Reis does not prove Atlantis. It does not prove Antarctica was mapped in a forgotten golden age. But it does prove that geographical knowledge can survive in fragments long after its original context is gone. And that is enough to make one piece of gazelle skin parchment feel heavier than it should. Not proven, not dismissed, still waiting behind the ink. But the next lost continent does not depend on a lost source. It does not need a disputed coastline. It has measurements, it has crust, it has a name, and it was hiding beneath one of the most familiar island nations on Earth. That brings us to Zealandia. Us to number 3. Zealandia, the hidden continent beneath New Zealand. On most maps, New Zealand looks like 2 islands, but that may be the most misleading thing about it. North Island, South Island, mountains, volcanoes, coastlines, and a small country sitting alone in the southwestern Pacific. But beneath the blue around it, the land does not end. It continues. In 2017, a team of geologists argued that New Zealand was not simply an island nation at all. It was the exposed peak of a continent, a real continent, mostly drowned, mostly invisible, and hiding in plain sight. Its name is Zealandia. The numbers are difficult to process. Zealandia covers roughly 4.9 million square kilometers, making it close in size to the Indian subcontinent. But about 94% of it lies underwater. Only the highest parts still rise above the sea. New Zealand, New Caledonia, a scattering of islands. The rest is submerged beneath the Pacific. That means millions of people were looking at the mountains of New Zealand without realizing they were seeing the visible crest of something much larger. Not an island, a continent with most of its body below the waterline. And that is what makes Zealandia different from Piri Reis, Hyperborea, or Kumari Kandam. It is not a controversial shape on an old map. It is not a memory preserved in poetry. It is not a myth waiting at the edge of proof. It is measured, mapped, studied. It is accepted by many geologists as Earth's hidden 8th continent. But the strangest part is this. Zealandia was not discovered because a sailor found a lost shore. It was recognized because scientists finally understood what the rocks had been saying all along. Continental crust is not the same as oceanic crust. It is generally thicker, lighter, more complex, and it carries a different geological history. For decades, the clues were there across the Southwest Pacific. Continental crust, a broad submerged platform, and a tectonic story that held together. The missing piece was not evidence. It was permission to call it a continent. That is the quiet shock of Zealandia. It was not waiting to be invented. It was waiting to be named. For generations, maps had already taught us what a continent was supposed to look like. Big, visible, above water, easy to outline. Zealandia broke that expectation. It forced geologists to ask a question that sounds simple, but changes everything. Does a continent stop being a continent just because the ocean covers it? The answer was no, and that answer quietly broke the schoolbook map. Zealandia began as part of Gondwana, the ancient southern supercontinent. Around 85 million years ago, it started pulling away from Australia and Antarctica as that older world cracked apart. For a time, parts of it may have stood higher above the sea. Then the continent thinned, stretched, sank, not all at once, not in a single catastrophe. But over millions of years, Zealandia slipped downward until almost its entire surface disappeared beneath the Pacific. A continent did not vanish because people forgot it. It vanished because the planet lowered it. And then, for most of human history, we mistook its surviving mountain peaks for islands. That is the uncomfortable lesson. Sometimes the map is wrong, not because ancient people imagined too much. Sometimes the map is wrong because modern people name too few. New Zealand was never just a lonely country at the edge of the ocean. It was the visible crest of a drowned continent. And once you see it that way, the Pacific stops looking empty. It becomes a covered landscape with mountains, plateaus, ridges, and fragments of old worlds beneath the water. Zealandia also changes the meaning of lost. A lost continent does not always need ruins, legends, or a forbidden map. Sometimes it can sit under research vessels, satellite data, shipping routes, and modern nations for decades before anyone is willing to call it what it is. The evidence was not hidden in a locked temple. It was not buried under a desert. It was there in the rocks, in the crust, and in the shape of the seafloor. But recognition came late, because seeing something and understanding what it means are not the same thing. For years, the world map showed New Zealand as an island nation. Technically, that was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was larger. Under the waves, the land continued, and that raises a question much bigger than Zealandia. If a continent nearly the size of India could sit beneath the Pacific and not be formally recognized until the 21st century, what else have we failed to name? How many structures beneath the ocean are waiting not for discovery, but for recognition? How many things are visible in data, but invisible in imagination? Zealandia proves the modern map can be incomplete without being ancient, mystical, or forgotten. Sometimes the problem is not missing evidence. It is the category we forced the evidence into. The eye saw islands. The Earth had built a continent. Zealandia is not a myth, not rumor, not a half memory. It is real, and still mostly underwater. A continent hiding beneath one of the most familiar island nations on Earth. But the next lost land is different again. It began as a scientific hypothesis. Then it escaped into a cult myth. And somewhere between abandoned geology and strange belief, it became one of the most famous lost motherlands ever imagined. That brings us to Mu and Lemuria. Number 2, Mu and Lemuria, the lost motherland that escaped into myth. In 1864, the mystery began with an animal on Madagascar, a lemur. Then the same problem appeared across the ocean: Africa, India, Southeast Asia. The animals seemed related, but the map did not cooperate. British zoologist Philip Sclater was trying to explain why lemurs and related species appeared across regions separated by vast oceans. With the scientific tools available at the time, one answer seemed possible. Maybe there had once been a land connection, a missing bridge, a vanished continent across the Indian Ocean. Sclater called it Lemuria. At the time, this was not a cult fantasy. It was not a prophecy. It was not a forbidden book. It was science trying to solve a real biological puzzle before plate tectonics existed. That is what makes Lemuria so strange. It did not begin as a myth. It began as a hypothesis. Then the Earth itself gave scientists a better answer. Plate tectonics showed that continents move, split, collide, and carry species histories with them. Madagascar, India, Africa, Antarctica, and other land masses had once belonged to older arrangements of the planet. You did not need a lost human motherland to explain the animals. As geology, Lemuria died. As a myth, it became stronger. That is where the story becomes dangerous, because some abandoned ideas disappear quietly. Lemuria did not. It escaped. In the late 19th century, Helena Blavatsky and theosophical writers pulled Lemuria into a spiritual history of lost races, ancient ages, and forgotten human origins. Later, James Churchward helped develop a parallel idea around Mu, a Pacific motherland he claimed had once given birth to civilization before being destroyed by catastrophe. The science had moved on, but the lost continent kept growing. And that is the uncomfortable part. Mu and Lemuria are not confirmed lost continents. They are not accepted by modern geology as vanished human motherlands. They do not prove an ancient global civilization. That must be said clearly. but they reveal something powerful about how lost continents are born in the human mind. A gap appears, an animal in the wrong place, an island too remote, a monument too strange for outsiders to explain. Then imagination moves in. In the Pacific, the idea of Mu attached itself to places that already felt mysterious to writers looking from the outside. The statues of Easter Island, the stone city of Nanmadol on Pohnpei, the underwater formations off Yonaguni. These are real places. But linking them into one vanished supercontinent is the leap. To speculative writers, they became fragments of one lost world. To mainstream archaeology, they are not proof of Mu. And that distinction matters. Polynesian navigation was not a leftover from a lost supercontinent. It was a human achievement in its own right. Canoes, stars, waves, wind, memory, knowledge passed across generations. To turn that into evidence for Mu can make the real achievement smaller, not larger. That is why this case must be handled carefully. The mystery is not that Mu has been proven. It has not. The mystery is why the idea became so hard to kill. Because the Pacific is not empty in the way old maps made it feel. Modern bathymetry has revealed plateaus, ridges, volcanic chains, drowned shelves, and submerged structures across the ocean. The Ontong Java Plateau, north of the Solomon Islands, covers an enormous area beneath the sea. The Manihiki Plateau lies farther east, and Zealandia itself proved that continent-scale geography can sit beneath the Pacific and be misunderstood for generations. That does not prove Mu, but it changes the emotional shape of the question. When people look across the Pacific and see scattered islands, long voyages, vanished coasts, and ancient monuments, they begin to ask whether something larger was lost. Sometimes that question leads to science. Sometimes it leads to myth. Sometimes it leads to both being tangled together. Lemuria shows how a scientific hypothesis can become obsolete and still survive as legend. Mu shows how a legend can grow around real mysteries without proving itself true. Together, they warn us about something important. Not every lost continent is real, but not every myth is born from nothing. Some myths grow from science that later became obsolete. Some misunderstood evidence. Some humans need to connect scattered fragments into one lost world. That is what Mu and Lemuria became. A story built from real geography, abandoned theory, oceanic awe, and imagination. Too unsupported to be accepted as history, too influential to ignore as a myth. They survived not because they were proven. They survived because they gave the ocean a center, a lost beginning, a motherland beneath the waves, not as reliable as history, not erased as myth, still powerful enough to haunt every conversation about lost continents. And that brings us to the final name, the one every lost continent story eventually has to face. Not because it is proven, not because it is simple, but for more than 2,000 years, it has remained the symbol of everything humans fear the sea may have taken. That brings us to Atlantis. Number 1, Atlantis, the lost continent every map story returns to. Around 360 BC, Plato wrote about a civilization that disappeared in a single day and night. Earthquakes, floods, the sea closing over a world. He placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. He described it as a powerful land with kings, temples, harbors, armies, laws, and an influence reaching across the Western Mediterranean. Then it was gone. Not slowly, not over centuries. In one day and one night, the story says, Atlantis sank beneath the sea. That is the image that survived. A world erased so completely that all later generations inherited was the wound. And this is why every lost continent story eventually returns to Atlantis. Not because it is proven, not because it is simple, but because for more than 2,000 years, it has remained the shadow behind every drowned land, every ancient map, every flood memory, and every question the ocean refuses to answer. Atlantis must be handled carefully. Plato's account is not proof of a lost Atlantic supercontinent. It does not prove an advanced global civilization. It does not prove that every strange map or flood myth points to the same place. That must be said clearly. But the reason Atlantis refuses to die is not that the story is easy to prove. It is because the details are too specific to ignore comfortably. Plato did not simply say there was once a lost island. He gave a location. Beyond Gibraltar, he gave a chain of transmission. Egyptian priests told Solon. Solon carried the story into Greek memory, and Plato later wrote it down, and he gave a date. Roughly 9,000 years before Solon. That places the destruction near the end of the last ice age, around the same broad window when sea levels were rising, coastlines were changing, and lowlands around the world were being swallowed by water. That does not prove Atlantis, but it changes the feeling of the story, because Atlantis no longer sits alone. Doggerland and Beringia proved that human worlds can drown. Mauritia, Greater Adria, and Zealandia proved that continents can hide, break, sink, and survive beneath other names. Hyperborea, Kumari Kandam, and Piri Reis showed how maps and memories can carry shapes no one can fully explain. Mu and Lemuria warned us that desire can turn gaps into myth, and Atlantis gathers all of those tensions into one name. The mainstream answer remains cautious. Many scholars treat Atlantis as a philosophical story, a political warning, or a moral allegory about pride, empire, and collapse. And they may be right. Plato often used stories to teach larger truths. Atlantis may have been designed as a warning to civilizations, Athens, a warning that even powerful civilizations can become corrupt and fall. But even if Atlantis began as philosophy, the geography has never stopped pulling people back. The Atlantic is not a blank slate for fantasy. It is a scarred ocean floor. It contains the Azores Plateau, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, submerged shelves, seamounts, fracture zones, and coastlines that looked different when sea levels were lower. None of these proves Atlantis, but they explain why the question survived. Because the place Plato pointed toward was never empty in the human imagination. It was a place where land might have been, where land might have vanished, where the map always seemed to leave room for one more missing shore. And then there are the Phantom Islands. For centuries, cartographers placed strange lands in the Atlantic that modern geography could not confirm. High Brazil appeared west of Ireland on maps for hundreds of years before finally vanishing from accepted charts. Most of these Phantom Islands were mistakes. Some were wishful thinking. Some were probably distortions of real islands, fog banks, currents, or sailor reports. But together, they reveal something important. The Atlantic was not just water to the people of the Old World. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty leaves space for ghosts. That is why Atlantis became more than a story. It became the container for every fear that history is older than our records. Every fear that civilization may have risen, collapsed, and vanished before writing could protect it. Every fear that the sea is not just a boundary, but an archive, a dark archive, a broken archive, an archive that does not return everything it takes. And that is the real power of Atlantis. Not certainty, possibility, not proof, convergence, a Greek philosopher, an Egyptian priestly memory, a date near the end of the Ice Age, a location beyond Gibraltar, a world ocean that really was rising, a long cartographic tradition filled with phantom lands. Each piece alone can be explained. Together, they refuse to sit quietly. Atlantis may have been philosophy, distorted memory, coastal catastrophe, or a warning sharpened into myth. But the question survived because it touched something real. The sea had taken worlds before. That is why Atlantis sits exactly where proof ends and memory begins. Too famous to ignore, too uncertain to accept, too deeply rooted to erase. That is why every generation returns to it. Not because we expect to find marble towers under the Atlantic, not because Plato needs to be literally right, but because Atlantis asks the one question that runs beneath every lost land in this story. how much human history disappeared before history learned how to write itself down. Because the sea does not only erase land, it erases names, records, languages, roads, temples, warnings. And sometimes, after everything else is gone, it leaves only a story. A story that may be false in its shape, but true in its fear. That somewhere beneath the water, the past is larger than the map allows. And somewhere beneath the map, the world we lost may still be waiting. If this story made the map feel less certain, watch the next documentary on screen now. And subscribe for more hidden history buried by time, disaster, and memory.